There are moments in life that define you when you feel like everything slows down and the entire world is cast in a new light. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, halfway through a philosophy lecture on existentialism. I was sitting in my usual spot, 2 rows from the back, close enough to feel engaged, but far enough to remain unnoticed. Professor Elaine Monroe stood at the front of the class, her voice calm and measured, weaving together complex ideas about free will and the nature of human existence. She was 54 years old, but there was a timelessness about her presence. Her silver hair was neatly tied back in a bun, and the few strands that escaped caught the light streaming in from the classroom windows, giving her an almost ethereal glow. She wore her usual attire, a simple but elegant dress that somehow always seemed perfect. It wasn't about her clothes, though, or even her appearance. It was the way she moved, her mind worked, the way she commanded a room full of students with nothing but her words. I remember watching her that day, captivated, as she spoke about Sartre's notion of freedom and responsibility. It wasn't the lecture that had my attention, though. It was her. As she paused to look over her notes, I felt something shift inside me. I couldn't quite put it into words at the time, but in hindsight, I know what it was. It was love, a strange, intense, all-consuming love for a woman I had no right to love. A woman who was not only decades older than me but also my lecturer. I was 20, and she was 54. The very idea was absurd, and yet, there it was, staring me in the face, undeniable and inescapable. At first, I told myself it was just admiration. After all, who wouldn't admire someone like Professor Monroe? She was brilliant, articulate, confident, everything I aspired to be. But admiration doesn't keep you awake at night. Admiration doesn't make your heart race every time someone mentions their name. It doesn't cause your thoughts to drift to them even when you're supposed to be focusing on other things. The more I tried to rationalize my feelings, the more they grew. I found myself looking forward to her lectures, not for the content but for the chance to see her, to hear her voice, to watch her interact with the class. I started staying after lectures, pretending to have questions just so I could be near her a little longer. Each time, she would smile patiently, answer my queries, and move on with her day, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, of course. How could I explain that I, a 20-year-old student, was hopelessly in love with a woman more than twice my age? A woman whose life experience dwarfed my own, who had seen and done things I couldn't even begin to imagine. The very thought made me feel foolish and immature, and yet, I couldn't help it. My feelings for her were real, no matter how impossible they seemed. It wasn't long before my infatuation turned into obsession. I started reading everything I could find about her, academic articles, interviews, anything that gave me a glimpse into her mind. I wanted to know everything about her, what books she liked, what music she listened to, what her favorite foods were. I even found myself looking up photos of her from years ago, trying to piece together the life she had lived before becoming my lecturer. I began to notice little things about her that no one else seemed to pay attention to. The way she would tap her pen against the podium when she was deep in thought, the subtle way her eyes would light up when a student made an insightful comment, the soft, almost musical lilt in her voice when she recited poetry during class. Every detail became a treasure, something to be cherished and stored away in the ever-growing catalog of my thoughts about her. But as my obsession deepened, so did my despair. I knew there was no future for us, no possibility of my feelings being reciprocated. She was a respected academic, and I was just a student. Even if there wasn't such a vast age difference between us, the very idea of a relationship between us would be unthinkable. She had her career, her reputation, her life, and I had, well, nothing that could compare to that. I often fantasized about what it would be like if things were different. I imagined us talking for hours over coffee, discussing philosophy and literature, laughing together as if the age gap between us didn't exist. I pictured us walking through the park on a crisp autumn afternoon, her hand in mine as if it was the most natural thing in the world. In my mind, we were equals, two souls who had somehow found each other despite the odds. But reality always had a way of intruding on these fantasies. Every time I saw her, I was reminded of how impossible it all was. She was kind to me, of course, but it was the same kindness she showed to all her students. There was no special connection, no hidden meaning in her words or actions. To her, I was just another face in the crowd, another young mind to be molded and shaped. Nothing more. It became harder to concentrate on my studies. My grades began to slip, and I found myself constantly distracted, daydreaming about her instead of focusing on the work in front of me. I knew I needed to snap out of it, to get over this ridiculous infatuation, but I didn't know how. Every time I tried to push her out of my mind, she came rushing back, more vividly than before. The end of the semester was approaching, and with it, the end of my time in Professor Monroe's class. Part of me was relieved. Maybe once I wasn't seeing her every week, my feelings would start to fade. But another part of me, a larger part, was terrified. What if this was my last chance to be near her? What if I never saw her again? I found myself lingering after class more often, searching for excuses to talk to her. Each time, I hoped for some sign, some indication that maybe, just maybe, she felt something for me too. But it never came. She was always polite, always professional, always distant. One day, as I was leaving the classroom, I overheard a conversation between two of my classmates. They were talking about Professor Monroe's retirement. She had mentioned in passing that this would be her last semester teaching before she moved on to focus on her research full-time. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. She was leaving, and there was nothing I could do about it. On the last day of class, I stayed behind, waiting for everyone else to leave. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say 100 times in my head, but now that the moment had arrived, I wasn't sure if I could go through with it. My heart was pounding in my chest as I approached her desk. "Professor Monroe," I began, my voice shaky. She looked up from her papers, smiling that same kind, distant smile. "Yes? I wanted to say thank you. Your class has been incredible. You've been incredible." She smiled again, a hint of confusion in her eyes. "Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it." There was a long pause as I searched for the right words. I wanted to tell her everything, how much she meant to me, how much I admired her, how deeply I had fallen for her. But in the end, all I could manage was a simple, "I'm going to miss you." Her smile softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, some flicker of understanding in her eyes. But then it was gone, and she nodded. "I'll miss teaching all of you," she said. "But I'm sure you'll do great things. Keep pushing yourself. You've got a bright future ahead of you." With that, she gathered her things and walked out of the classroom, leaving me standing there, alone. It's been months since that day, and I still think about her. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had been brave enough to tell her how I felt. Would it have made a difference? Probably not. But at least I would have known for sure. In the end, I realize now that what I felt for her wasn't really love. It was infatuation, an obsession born out of admiration and the loneliness of being a young man trying to find his way in the world. She represented everything I wanted to be: wise, confident, successful, and in my mind, that admiration transformed into something more. I'll never forget Professor Monroe, but I also know that it's time to let go. Life is full of impossible loves, but it's also full of real possibilities if you're willing to see them. I hope you're not gonna judge me. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.